welcome everyone. Today, we're going to have our Designing Communities Q&A panel. We're going, in a moment, we're going to meet some of our panelists and go over some questions that were that everyone voted on. And the reason that we picked all of our panelists today is because we wanted to show the diversity of the types of people who work on designing communities. Also, this is the wrong poster. I apologize, but Jammelah is a structural engineer. I realized that that's incorrect on there. But thank you again for all of our panelists for showing up today and for everyone that voted on questions. So first, I have a poll. If I can get that pulled up real quick, if my cursor will work. So the poll is, what do you personally think is the most important part of designing communities? And you will choose between making the community sustainable, highlighting the community's character, making the community safe, providing space and connections for everyone, and maximizing the functionality of the community. I'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer, and then I'll share the results. So our top answer was making the community safe. Our top 2 and 3 were providing space and connections for everyone and maximizing the functionality of the community. The 4th was making the community sustainable. Awesome. Cool. So hopefully today we'll learn a bit more about how people are impacting the communities with their careers. But first, I want to introduce the panelists to everyone. So first, we have Alex Morales, got his undergraduate degree in architecture with the business administration minor. He's a structural steel specialist for AISC, or the American Institute of Steel Construction, and he has worked in architecture, engineering, and construction in the construction industry for over 10 years. Next, we have Jammelah Ingram PE. She got her BS in civil engineering and master's in civil engineering with a focus in structural engineering, mechanics, and materials. And she is a lead structural engineer and deputy project manager. Next, we have Dr. Grayson, who got her bachelor's in biology and later a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. She is an associate professor in the biology department at the University of Richmond. Next, we have Jossie Haines, who got her bachelor's in chemistry and a master's in computer science. She spent 20 years in the tech industry and is the vice president of software engineering at Tile. And she previously worked at Apple and American Express. And last, we have Karrie Mosca PE, who earned her bachelor's in civil engineering and is currently the vice president of Woods Rogers, which is an engineering firm, and they prepare feasibility studies, preliminary engineering studies, and construction plans. So to learn a lot more about our panelists, since we're kind of short on time with like the 45 minutes to an hour, please go to repicture.com/people and you can search their names and you can find out more information about each of them. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll start the question asking. All right, so for the panel this week, this is something that we did not do last week at all, but we're going to have students within the program ask the questions today. And our first question will be asked by Blessing. She is an electrical engineering student from Morgan State University. So Blessing, if you are here, would you remember to unmute and then ask our first question.
Hello, good morning. My name is Blessing. So my first question, my question is going to be, what are the greatest challenges you have faced in your career? Okay, so that's my question.
Okay. I'm going to, we had a little trouble hearing that. Did anyone else have trouble hearing the question?
Yeah, I think maybe if you put it in the chat, that might work if there's an issue.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm gonna put it in the chat for this one. But so the first question is, what is the most unique project you've been a part of? And this can be something that maybe you weren't expecting to work on. But would anyone like to go first? And I can just pick someone. But, Alex, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, first, kudos and congrats to all of you all for exploring some really exciting careers in STEM. So I'm just here, just oogling, and so happy to even be part of this. So congrats, and keep on keeping on, as they say. So, the first project, I guess, that I thought I wasn't gonna work on that was pretty exciting was when I did what folks in my industry call joining the dark side. So I went from architecture to construction management because I really wanted to sort of figure out how to improve being a designer, right? So that was kind of the next step for me. But it ended up being at a very special place. And my claim to fame is that I kind of was almost an astronaut. So I'm like stretching it by this much because that's nowhere near the truth. That project was at NASA, at the Johnson Space Center right here in Houston, where I'm at. And it was a mission critical project. And so as sort of my first assignment to venture off into the construction management field, that was a pretty daunting task because it was sort of uber high security. And, if anything went wrong, there was like 1,000 eyes on you. So, I wore so many hats from doing project management stuff to going out and sort of making sure that we didn't have any site runoff into the storm sewer systems because we had to protect the environment when we're working on site. So I think that's one thing that I didn't know that I was going to get into by transitioning, but it certainly gave me lots of lessons learned and moments to improve upon. So that was it for me.
I can jump in there since Alex used the phrase claim to fame and share mine, which is that I have captured the state record holding snapping turtle for North Carolina, which is not the one you saw in the picture. That's one from our campus here at University of Richmond. But when I was an undergrad, I had no idea I was going to end up studying critters like snakes and turtles. That was sort of not the kind of biology I thought I was interested in. But I sort of went for it. But then after I finished my graduate work, I had a family situation where I couldn't be quite as mobile as some people are at various points in their career. And so there was someone who was working on an invasive caterpillar at the school near where my husband was working. And I was like, well, I'll just apply for it because, it's not quite a salamander or a turtle or the things that I was expecting to study at this stage, but it's a critter and I like studying organisms and their interactions with the environment. And so I think that sort of being versatile, being open to lots of things that aren't maybe the thing you would expect that you would be doing, and just sort of putting yourself out there in lots of different circles. All of a sudden I was going to insect management meetings that were sponsored by Monsanto, which is an organization I thought was kind of evil and would never be sort of associated with. And sort of just ended up in new spaces and finding new directions and ways to take my research and then bring it back to students, which is the main part of my job now, which is doing projects and teaching. And I love everything about what I get to do.
I would have to agree with Dr. Grayson on the part about, you know, finding yourself in places that you didn't necessarily expect yourself to be. My background is in bridges, but during this 2020 pandemic, I started as a deputy project manager on a bus garage replacement project. So it's completely different. It's first of all, it's like a building structure. So that's totally different from what I, you know, been studying all this time. The team is going to demolish the existing bus garage and replace it with a whole new modernized facility that's even going to be certified with through LEED, you know, the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design certification. Also, there'll be a space for future battery electric bus. So there are just lots of bells and whistles on this project and parts that I never expected. And one of the most unique features is that there's an archaeological area of interest. So apparently the site in the 1860s is the location of a foundry where the Statue of Freedom that sits atop the Capitol Dome was cast. And Philip Reed, you should Google his name, was very instrumental in that. So I'm excited for that part to see, you know, what'll be discovered there.
I can chime in here. So for me, one of the most unique projects I worked on was actually when I worked on Siri. So I worked on Siri music during the development of the HomePod, and we actually added over 30 new features to Siri, including being able to say no, the other one, if you actually are asking Siri for a song that has multiple artists or versions of it. I also worked on Siri on Apple TV, which was a lot of fun. And we actually got a technical Emmy for that integration when I was working on it, which was pretty cool. And I think what was really unique about that experience is just like how many different teams were involved in building something like the HomePod. I think I was regularly, you know, meeting with over 30 different teams at Apple to try to make this happen. And so, you know, sometimes, you know, you see those like magic events that Apple does and it looks easy, but trust me, when you're in the engineer in the background, hoping that that demo goes perfectly well, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so, yeah, I think that was like a really unique experience, kind of seeing how that all went together.
My last. Well, I thought about this. So I am a land development engineer. All my projects are, you know, primarily housing for, you know, building homes for people. Not building homes, not architect, but, you know, getting the land ready to build a house. So a unique, almost all the projects I work on, to be honest, are unique because each piece of land has different constraints, you know, different neighbors, different utility connections, just different things that make it unique. But actually, probably the one that's sticking out right now is one that I've just been involved in over the past year and a half. And it is actually a project I did pro bono. So we have I'm here in the Bay Area, California Bay Area, and we have an organization called the Builders Association. It's associated with the National Home Builders, and it's our Bay Area group, and all the big home builders, contribute to this organization, and it advocates for them. So if cities are putting in new fees or new regulations, the BIA will go in there and fight for the builders to make sure that, you know, it works for the building industry. As part of that organization, there's a charitable arm, and it's called Home Aid, and it's nationwide as well. You know, may have heard of it before. And the builders pay, you know, they contribute to Home Aid, and Home Aid's goal is to provide housing for homeless, for the unsheltered. And in the Bay Area, that's certainly a very big problem. I'm sure it's a problem in many cities throughout the country. Here and actually the project I'm going to tell you about is here in the town I live in, by chance. So it also makes it a bit unique. I don't get to work in my city very often, but I live in the city of Livermore. And there's a church in this town called Crosswinds Church, and they have about 40 acres of land. And they really wanted to do something for the community. They wanted to provide housing for the unsheltered. There's a lot of people that live a creek that's adjacent to the highway, and they really had an interest in trying to use their land for the community. So they had an idea. They have an old dairy in the south of the property. There's some old buildings, but there's a lot of open space. And so they thought tiny homes is all the rage. You guys probably all hear about tiny homes, right? So they decided they wanted to bring some tiny homes onto the property and turn it into a village for homeless, and try to bring these people, get services to them. It's intended to be more of a transitional homeless, because certainly the idea is to get people into permanent housing and get them back on their feet. And so through Homemade, they asked if I'd get involved. And I said yes, not knowing how much of a commitment and a process it was going to be. And it's also, they're on wheels. So they wanted to keep them on wheels so that they were temporary. And so that's something different for me and all the team that I've worked on, because we're used to building homes on foundations, and building, a community of homes on wheels is just a very different process. So I worked with the city, I worked with the project team to lay out these homes. And the unique part of it was, I've told many of the people I've worked with on, it was just like a jigsaw puzzle that you kept having to put together. Like somebody kept throwing it on the ground saying, put it back together again, because the parameters kept changing. They wanted accessible units, which needed to be bigger and needed to have ramping into them. So then you had to reconfigure the neighborhood. And so we went through a lot of site plan changes. The other thing is, even though you think everyone's on the same team, everybody is interested in and wants to make the project happen because it's an important project for the community. I still had to work with the civil engineering group in the city to address their concerns. And there's a lot of friction there. You want to just say, help me help get this project done. And you feel like there's just red tape and hurdles. And so pushing through that constantly and understanding what you're doing is super important. So you just got to, so I put a lot of time into it, a lot of personal time into it, outside of office hours kind of a thing, to make sure that the project really succeeded. Once we got the planning part of it approved and all the houses where we needed to be in the city had approved it, then we had to put together construction documents. We had to make sure we could get sewer to these units and water to these units and electrical to these units. And and then finally got into construction. And then even during construction, then it became, how do we actually move these units on wheels into these places where they're like a puzzle? They ended up moving them with a crane. They brought a crane out and they literally picked the units up and they placed them in their space. And so, I would go to the site, and it's very close to my house, and watch it come to life. And I went there on crane day, and it was just an absolutely amazing thing to see. And then you've got this community, they call it Goodness Village. I mean, you can look it up. They have a social media, and they've got just teams of volunteers that are coming in and donating their time and their money and things. They're putting, furniture, making these units really be like a home, and actually are moving people in like today or tomorrow, the first few residents. So there's 28 tiny homes, 28 residents that previously are unhoused. So at the end of the day, it's not a project I necessarily thought I would get involved in. We do pro bono work, but it's in my 20 plus years, it's actually the biggest and most substantial pro bono job I've done. And it's in my own town, and it's just very rewarding to understand where I started and where it is today. And I don't know that it's a claim to fame, but I will say that I put a lot of energy into it. And many times the team members have said they wanted to put a statue of me on the site. And I was like, no, I don't want my face on your project. But I know I had a really impact on making it, come to life, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Thank you. I really loved all of your answers. So moving on to our second question. Oh my goodness. Okay, so our second question is going to be asked by Joseph, and he is a recent graduate of George Mason University, who studied computer science. So Joseph, if you are ready, remember to unmute, and I will post the question that you say also in the chat.
Hi, it's nice to meet all of you. My question is, what role do engineers versus scientists versus computer scientists play in designing communities?
And this question is specifically for Jossie and Karrie to answer.
Yeah, I can go first here. And so I think this is such a crucial question because, a lot of times software engineers need to consider the impact of the work they're doing on the greater community. And so this is really tied to my mission around keeping women and underrepresented minorities in tech, because technology today is not actually truly addressing the needs of those communities. And the reason is, we don't have enough diversity in our existing employee bases. So, an example I like giving around, building communities and how technology can really impact things as a computer scientist is, I'll actually go back to the Siri example. So one of the things you can actually ask Siri Sports is, tell me who the top 10 sports players are for any sport. So you can say, who are the top 10 basketball players? And it actually defaults to men's sports. And the reason it does is there's actually all the Siri engineers on Siri Sports are actually men. And they decided that, oh, men's sports are what people care about. And so that's what we're going to turn back. But and you might not think about users of Siri as a community, but it actually is. Like any people who are, using a large amount of technology in a way are a community. And because the devs made this decision, that actually impacts how everybody who uses Siri potentially is exposed to what is underlying bias here. And so, it's so crucial for people who are in software engineering to think about the impacts of what they're working on the greater world. There's an amazing movie that recently was released on Netflix called Coded Bias that really talks about the underlying bias in a lot of technology. And a lot of that really is impacted by what we as software engineers can do on a daily basis to change that narrative in the future.
I think, when a client comes to us with a piece of land that they want to develop, it is really our job, my job, to help them figure out what they really can put on that land. And part of that is what the city will allow, or what the city's regulations currently are expecting for that piece of property. It might also be what you could put on it, even if the city's not currently allowing it, because the builder might be interested in going to the city and asking for something to be changed. But there could be other constraints on the property that won't allow them to even do what they want. Perhaps there's no sewer nearby, and you have to build a lift station or pump station, or a lot of offsite improvements that are very expensive and that may not make the project feasible. At the end of the day, we're building homes for people, but homemade is one exception. Most builders are doing it to make a profit of some sort, right? So it needs to be financially feasible for them to do the amount of work that it takes to build a house. So it really is, the engineers first look at the land to understand, what the constraints are for the project. There could be giant easements on the property, for instance, that you can't build homes within, maybe a gas line, or some sort of major water line that impacts the property. So it's really our first look at that land to say, what can you do with it? What are the constraints to it? Are those constraints something you can get past? Are they, do cost estimates? We do a lot of cost estimates early at the beginning of the project to see if the project is financially feasible. In that Crosswinds homemade project, for example, they started off with, I think they had 32 tiny homes, and they ended up with 28. And the big reason for that is they wanted to put like 4 buildings in an area of an existing parking lot. And, I got to a point with them where I said, it's really expensive to bring utilities just for these 4 units, like so expensive. It seemed like it maybe wasn't worth it. And at the end of the day, we ended up dropping those 4 units. So unfortunate because it was less, but those are the kinds of decisions that have to be made to make sure that what you're doing, that you can still have a successful project at the end of the day. So, we work with the physical land. It's not virtual. It's not. It's literally like we have to be able to say, the sewer is gravity. You can get into it. The storm drain's gravity. You can get into it, or you can't. You'll need to build sewer lift station, and those things cost X. You can put 20 lots on here or 200 lots on here, or you can't because you've got a big easement. So all these physical constraints, engineering, it's one thing I think why I like where I landed in land development, because when I was in school and I did classes like thermodynamics and just mathematical classes, it was too philosophical. It was too untouchable to me. And I think that's why I like what I do. It's more concrete. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it. When someone's handed a key to a new home, I'll be honest, civil engineers don't get all the glory. They have award ceremonies at BIA and they award the architects and the landscape architects and the builders, and they never award the civil engineers, but that's fine. I know that they wouldn't be handing a key to them if we weren't involved. So that's kind of why I think engineers kind of stand out. Civil land development engineer.
Thank you both. And thank you, Joseph, for asking this question today. So our third question will be asked by Brian. He goes to Allen Hancock College, is in his second year of mechanical engineering.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. So I wanted to ask, what choices did you make that defined your career that you didn't know would at the time?
And yeah, this question is for Alex, Dr. Grayson, and Jossie.
I can chime in on this. So I guess kind of wrapping this into the theme of building communities, I think that'll help me answer this, I think, important question. So I think, all of you, and I'm really sort of pumped up because I see a human prism of diversity represented here. And that really represents what STEM, the future of STEM is, right? So again, kudos to you all for exploring those careers and sort of changing that face of what it can be. But communities really means that you all might even be working with each other in the future to some point, right? Communities is not really just communities of humans, but also to what Kristine does, communities of animals. And so in the built environment and stuff that we build day in and day out, we not only affect the community at large as what we define community, but we affect all of what we would call micro communities, communities of diversity, people of color, people of different sort of environments, urban versus rural. So all of these communities really sort of coalesce, and as designers, you all will be integral in working and sort of weaving those together, transportation wise, right? Land development wise, how do you affect flora and fauna? So all of those communities goes into the envelope of building communities. And so I guess to answer the question is, you'll probably at some point in your careers, as you start navigating those ropes, start asking yourself, do I know enough? And you might be a little bit shy to sort of ask questions. And I would really encourage you to sort of speak up. Because I think for me personally, a challenge was growing up in Brazil. I grew up in a society where I needed to respect my elders, and properly so, right? And so it was really difficult for me to sort of challenge people who were like 80 years old or 70 years old. And so transitioning into the career mode, I was sort of quiet and sort of thinking that, my work will show for itself. And so I don't really need to be loud per se and ask for a promotion or a raise. But it later on dawned on me that, careers can be, honestly speaking, really competitive. And so sometimes our managers and our supervisors are so busy that they may not necessarily see what we're doing, because if you think about it, they're managing large groups of folks. And so I would say that it's important for you all, through lessons learned, sort of pass it on as I can, to begin to advocate for yourself early on in your careers and really keep tracks of what your successes are, so that if you want to mobilize and move forward, you can bring those as testament to why you should sort of keep your career moving. So I would say that's kind of like big picture, wrapping it all up into today's theme, how I would answer that question. So thanks for asking, Brian.
Yeah, I would definitely reiterate Alex's point that, don't be afraid to toot your own horn and sell yourself and promote yourself as being sort of ready for a new challenge and open to different things. There's always that flip side, right? You want to be honest about what your skill set is and what you can and can't do and what you're prepared to take on. But I think that's a skill and an important thing in certainly American industries that, we don't often feel comfortable doing when it comes to like talking about ourselves or pitching yourself on your cover letter or resume and sort of having that confidence to put yourself out there. To add to that on the theme of community, I would think a lot about what community is important to you and what sort of level of priority do you want to put to different things when you're looking at future jobs, future schools, future decisions. Is, location most important to you? Living in a certain sort of place and having a community that you can surround yourself with that sort of supports you and is the kind of environment you're comfortable in? Or are you looking for a really particular niche kind of industry or opportunity and you don't care so much about where it is, you just really are passionate about working on bridges or studying turtles or whatever, or trying to go to space, right? Whatever the thing is that is your goal and sort of what you want your sort of future self and future life to look like. Don't be afraid to prioritize that first and then let the other sort of pieces fall into place behind it.
Yeah, and to just add to this a little bit, in early 2018, when I left Apple, I actually almost left the tech industry. I was kind of fed up with how women in tech were treated, and I was going to go start my own thing. And I realized, though, like I said earlier, if I walked away, I'd be walking away from having the ability to impact the future. And so I decided to come back to tech and do it under my rules this time. And so one of the things I always tell people is, realize your career is going to have a lot of ups and downs. It's not going to be linear. And so don't assume that, like, if you make a choice early, that like it's now defined the rest of your life, because there's so many different directions, and especially with technology, right? Technology is changing so much. I reflect on the fact that I started doing this 20 years ago. I got my first cell phone after college when I was 20. I wrote software for cell phones back in the days, and it was like 2 lines of black and white text, right? And so if I hadn't kept learning and just being willing to engage and keep changing things, like I wouldn't be where I am today. And so, my big thing is, just keep having a learning and growth mindset, because that's really what's crucial. And yes, there's sometimes the choices you make along the way might not be what you think was the best one, but realize everything's a learning experience and we're going to keep growing and getting better.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your answers. And thank you again, Brian, for asking a question. So our next question is going to be asked by Grace, and she's a biomedical engineering student from Bucknell University.
Hi, thank you all for coming today. My question is, what are the greatest challenges you have faced in your career?
This is for Jammelah and Karrie.
Well, sure, challenges. If I have to just pick one, I would say learning to think on my feet. That's probably one of my greatest, because I started out, in a role and I still am, like a bridge designer. So in that role, I have the time to, critically think about my answers, talk it over with other engineers and, develop my response. Now, moving forward, I became a project engineer assisting a real estate team in acquiring property for a light rail transit line. And when you're acquiring property, you're meeting with lots of property owners. You're explaining to them why, you know, the state needs their land for this project. And you're going to be faced with a lot of questions, and a lot of impromptu discussions will come up. So you can do as much as you can to prepare, you know, for these questions in advance, but there is a time where someone will ask you something that you just don't know the answer to right away. And so, you know, I had to kind of come up with some strategies for that. First of all, one of them is, I don't know. I don't know. I will follow up and get back to you. Or, you know, knowing that you're not there alone, oftentimes you're with other engineers as well. So learning how to engage with your teams that may be subject matter experts on a particular thing, and, you know, kind of have that synergy with your teammate. And also really, experience is the best teacher for these kinds of things, for thinking on your feet. You just have to put yourself out there. And, you know, if you make a mistake, you just go back and try it again. So that's one of my greatest challenges.
I will say that that's really good advice. I tell all my staff, you can't be afraid to say you don't know the answer. You should say, if you don't know the answer, you should say, I don't know, but I will find out, or I don't know, but I will get back to you. Worst thing you can do is try to fake it. You know, you need to be prepared to give the right answer. I would say, actually, for me, it was actually changing companies. So I was at a firm for about 15 years. I really started at the firm out of college, and learned sort of everything I'd known there. It was a comfortable place, you know, it was like home, but it was missing a lot of elements for me personally in the company. I wasn't looking to make a change because I was financially comfortable there. And again, it was just a comfortable place. But I was presented an opportunity by the company not now, Wood Rogers, about 8 years ago. So I've been with Wood Rogers now for about 8 years. They were looking for expansion into the Bay Area of their land development. They have really strong roots in the Sacramento area. That's where they started, and also have a pretty strong presence in Reno, Nevada area. But they really wanted to get into the Bay Area, and they tried it a lot of times without success. And what they really wanted was to find an experienced engineer who also had a lot of ties to the land development community in the Bay Area. And a client of mine recommended me, and I was approached by the company and offered a position. And it was a very entrepreneurial type of position, because basically they were saying, we want you, you know, with our planner partner, to grow an office in the Bay Area, and we'll give you all the tools you need to do that. It was almost like, think of it like your own business, you know, but you have the backing of this company. And so at the company I was at, I had not done any sort of business development. I was really just handed projects, and I was working as an engineer. And so the idea that I could go out there and market the company, market myself, try to grow, you know, it wasn't something that I had done. It was a terrifying thought. It was really scary. I didn't even know if I could do it, but it was also really exciting. And I had been at that company for a long enough time that I was, you know, restless. I didn't feel super challenged there. Even though the projects were challenging, I realized after some evaluation that I was sort of bored there. There wasn't an ownership, and this is definitely a diversity thing. All of the owners of the company were men. All of the owners that were coming in were men. I just knew that it wasn't a place for me to be an owner. I knew I could ask for it, and they might even give it to me because they did not want me to leave. But after realizing that, I thought, do I want to ask for it, then have them give it to me, and then sit at a table with all of them knowing they didn't really ever think I belonged there? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. This other company, they want me, they see benefit in, you know, what I can do for them, and they don't even know me. And I decided to take the leap. And I left that company after 15 years, and it was like a divorce. And I don't know what divorce is like, but I tell you, it felt like that. But it also felt really exhilarating, really exciting. And it was absolutely the best decision that I could have ever made in my career. Been very successful at Wood Rogers over the last 8 years, grown our Bay Area office pretty significantly, made a really, you know, still making a name for ourselves here in the land development community, but it's been really hard. You go from not having to look for work to actually sort of begging sometimes, I'm good, come on, give me a project. It's hard. And then you're denied or you lose a project. And, you'd think that the wins are, overshadow the losses. And sadly, that's not always the case. Sometimes the losses you still think about and hurt. And so, it's a roller coaster, and it just takes a lot to persevere and push through. But it also is what it makes it challenging and makes it exciting. And I think, don't be afraid to take a leap. And I think it's kind of what Jossie said too, right? Don't get stuck. Don't think that a decision you make is where you have to be forever. And as a matter of fact, I think that's some of the best advice, because I wouldn't change anything, but should I have stayed at that company for 15 years? Probably not. There was times when I wanted to leave real bad, and looking back on it, sometimes I think I would have, but then I wouldn't be where I am today either. So, just don't be afraid to reevaluate if you're not truly happy with what you're doing, and make a change, even if it's terrifying. As a matter of fact, because it's terrifying, you should probably do it. I think I'll say our company has kind of a brand, an internal brand, and it's challenge the way things are. Challenge the way, oh geez, I just forgot it. Challenge the way things are to create what should be. And I think you can use that in your own life, right? If you're not happy, if you think there's something better out there, look for it or take leap, because it can really be worth it. And if it's not, look again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I have gotten a few questions from people in the chat, and also I had some lightning questions, but we have 1 minute left. So I'll do the student question, and it's, I don't know if they want to ask it themselves. Frederick, did you want to ask your question yourself, or I can ask it, I can put it in the chat too, but I think okay.
I want to ask, do software engineers only write code, or do they do anything apart from writing code?
So the question was, do software engineers only write code?
So I'll pop in here. No, we do not only write code. We even, I'm a VP of engineering, so I actually write no code. But when I was doing individual contributor work, no, coding is not the only part of the job. And one of the things people don't realize is soft skills are super important for software engineers. You're constantly, collaborating with your other peers, you're talking to the product manager who's going to be sharing their vision, and you have to do a lot of negotiation, right? It's a team. Again, back to the whole communities piece, that to be an effective software engineer, it's about being part of your work community. And so, you're going to be doing code reviews, you're going to be going and looking at, functional specifications that share, what all the details are. I suspect, when I was coding, maybe 50% of my time, 70% on a lucky week, I'd be coding, but there's a lot of other stuff, doing designs, collaborating with people, code reviews that go into it as well. So no, it's not just about sitting in front of your computer all day, every day.
Thank you so much for answering that. So I know this session is supposed to end at 1:45, but I did want to ask one lightning question. So does everyone have time to do that? Awesome, thank you. And so also to keep it very short, please use either one word or phrase that might be difficult, because I think this question can have a lot of answers. But the lightning question is, what skills have you used the most? So you gotta choose one. We can start with Jamila. Would you like to start?
Sure. Technical writing skills.
I'll go. Multitasking.
I would say spreadsheeting and data management.
Empathy.
I would say interpersonal collaboration, kind of along Jossie's lines.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we are at the end of the panel. However, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to send them to me. I'm also going to give you the contact information of all the panelists here today. Some I'll be sending like a document of questions, and others you can reach out to personally, and I'll let everyone know that on the Google Classroom. And you can find everyone on the RePicture website, LinkedIn, for any further connections that you may have throughout your career. And I want to thank our panelists again for spending time with us today. I learned a lot, especially when I want to go into designing communities, like just in general. So it's been very insightful, and I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone in the RePicture program for spending time with us today.